Hello, everyone, and welcome to something a bit different. From the Depths is about to release, and hopefully that means a lot of people who have been following will buy the game or return to it after a long time. So, in my traditional no frills, no nonsense style, here's a short collection of tips and advice that I would give myself if I had to relearn the game from scratch right now. So I'm starting with something a bit philosophical, but basically, don't let the learning cliff scare you. The sheer amount of information can be overwhelming, but you can play this game and have some fun with minimal understanding of the mechanics. I'm usually the kind of person who likes to do their homework before investing a lot of time into, well, anything. But From the Depths includes basic vehicles available to you without having to spend a single minute in the designer, not to mention the huge selection of vehicles in the workshop. Chances are, even if you tried to learn a bunch before playing, you'd probably struggle to put that knowledge into practice in the beginning, so just embrace it. Hop on, load someone else's blueprint or your own crappy design if you want, and watch everything turn into glorious block confetti in a hail of explosions. It's fine. My next tip is to start small. So when you decide that it's time to build your own War Lego set, don't start with something the size of Darth Vader's Executor flagship. Set simple objectives and a budget. And ideally, I would recommend to aim for below 200,000 materials at most for your first vehicles. Big enough to have some freedom and some leeway, but small enough that making significant changes or even starting over won't feel entirely soul-crushing. If you fail within the given budget that you set yourself, consider starting by reevaluating your objectives. Building with a given budget is very important because that's what forces you to pay attention to the value of certain systems and their cost effectiveness. For example, if you're struggling to beat a crossbones with a 50,000 material ship, you might want to try just going for a different vehicle type, since the crossbones is actually quite powerful in ship-to-ship combat, but not as much against submarines or planes. Naturally, if you just want to recreate a replica of your favorite real or fictional vehicle with no concern for performance, then that's perfectly fine as well, and by all means, let go of the cost and just have fun. My third tip is to experiment, and that's another philosophical piece of advice, but I'm of the school of thought that theoretical knowledge and hands-on experience are both important. Theory crafting in From the Depths is very appealing, but don't reduce the game to just a bunch of numbers. If you think you finally understand one set of mechanics, test them. Make small-scale controlled tests and then move on to battle tests. Chances are it will change your perspective on what you thought would or wouldn't work, or it'll just clear up the meaning of the tooltips or whatever else you read or found your information on, and it will make a lot more sense to you than it did before you tested. My fourth tip is just to press Q forehead. It's a very simple tip, but at the time of recording this video, looking at a vehicle you own in the designer and pressing Q for a second will bring up a menu that lets you repair or refill different resources, which is really handy, especially for example, my third tip to experiment. In fact, you should probably try pressing Q when you look at just about any block in the game because there's a chance that it'll bring up a menu with options that you didn't even know about. My fifth tip is to pull vehicles in and out of play in the designer. So when you're designing a vehicle, you should probably try to go into the map view and pull your vehicle in and out of play if you're having issues, which hopefully should become increasingly rarer down the line. But it's also helpful if you have placed timers in the current session and you want to sync them. Pulling vehicles in and out of play basically makes them restart the same way they would when you load them into a battle in the campaign. And if you keep having issues, then consider just saving your vehicle and restarting the game. Again, hopefully this won't be needed down the line, but this is something, with this game, if you run it for a very long time, there's possibilities that something weird will happen eventually. My sixth piece of advice is just a quick difficulty reference list for different vehicle types, or basically how much pain and suffering are you willing to go through depending on the type of vehicle you want to build. This is my opinion and it's based on my own experience, so it doesn't mean you shouldn't start with something that I classify as being more difficult, but it's more likely you'll struggle if you do. So starting from the least difficult, I would put land vehicles. Aside from running into puddles or pesky mountains, you should be fine. They'll just sit on land no matter the weight, and they'll move if you put wheels on them. Pretty easy. The next up would be ships. Aside from sinking or maybe rolling if you put your rudders too low, ships are pretty easy to make. The next step up would be skimmers. Now those might jump up and do weird things if you don't build them right. Airships and spaceships are a bit wonky if you don't understand PIDs, and then you don't have water to help support you or provide some form of defense, so it's a little bit harder. Then you have helicopters and submarines. They're just, spaceships or airships with extra steps, basically. And finally, you have planes, which are just kind of difficult to get to do exactly what you want to do. They're a tough balancing act of drag and control surfaces and such things. And of course, if you really hate yourself, you can start by building transformers, which is entirely possible, but will likely result in tears. And finally, for my seventh tip, it's just a list of a few handy shortcuts and keybinds. So first off, there's Alt-N, which basically places a mirror line down the center of either your vehicle or the sub-object that you're currently building on. Very handy. And then you can just press Alt-N again, and it goes away. Then there's the middle mouse button. Depending on whether you're in or out of build mode, it'll bring up a few different set of options. And you can also hold the middle mouse button and use it to move around when you're in menus, which can be helpful if you're trying to look at something while also looking at a menu. And finally, there's a bunch of different options using P. So there's just the P key, which will actually just make everything look like an exploded view, so you can kind of see through your vehicle. And then there's the different sub options. Pressing Shift P, there's a drag view, there's a view for seeing through armor, there's a view that will only show you important blocks, a view without paint. There's a bunch of different views. It just cycles through them. It's very helpful for looking at either your own or other people's builds to figure out problems or where things are, etc., etc. That's all for this beginner's guide. I hope you'll enjoy the game as much as I do, and if you're looking for more information, I have and I will keep making more tutorials. As a bonus tip, if you want to learn more about the game, I recommend you mix and match different sources, such as the in-game tooltips, the manuals, there's tutorials, but there are also other channels besides mine. If you like different teaching styles, then there's written guides. I also have one of those, but I really need to update it. My personal suggestion would be to consider joining a Discord community for this game, as there is nothing quite like being able to ask someone. Anyway, please consider liking and subscribing if you found my video helpful, and leave a comment if you have questions, suggestions, or more quick tips for new players. Help spread the love for this unique game. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.